y bienvenidas a este sexto webinar.
Welcome to this sixth webinar, CLADE, in Gender Equality Perspective in Public Education in Central America and the Caribbean, under the framework of practices community on perspectives of gender equality. We take this opportunity to thank all the participants for joining us, and we'll wait for a couple of minutes before starting. Thank you very much.
Bueno, nuevamente damos la bienvenida a todos y todas las y los asistentes.
Once more, we thank all the attendees, participants. Some technical indications to start this webinar.
Quisiéramos decirle que la lógica de
We'd like to start that the logic of strengthening
el día de hoy en Latina y el Caribe, incluso
in Latin America and the Caribbean, and also from other regions. Then, for the people joining us at the Zoom platform, this will have simultaneous interpretation in Spanish, French, and English. Then you're kindly invited to select the interpretation channel located at the taskbar so that you can choose your desired channel. I would also like to remind you that this seminar will be recorded. Then, welcome you all, as I say, to the sixth CLADE Wonder Gender Perspective Initiatives in Education in Latin America and the Caribbean, developed under the context of our practice community on public education. I would like to briefly mention that when we end this seminar, you are invited to continue staying with us to participate in a workshop while we deepen the initiatives exposed today. This workshop will be a working-oriented space where you are invited to reflect upon the initiatives presented on the design and the implementation with gender equality initiatives in education. Once more, we thank all the speakers, the participants who have kindly accepted this invitation. So today we are pleased to invite to listen to presentations. The first one, Nestle Lizarasgo, and the second one, Sabina Lipov from the On Continue Association. Without further ado, I would like to start introducing Nelsie. Nelsie is from Colombia. It's Colombian and Ecuadorian. She has been trained in philosophy and letters and a postgraduate in international relations. Her professional work has been developed in the fields of alternative communication and popular education. Professor, consultant for different organs, particularly in human rights, mobility, and gender. She's currently General Coordinator of the Latin American Campaign for the Right to Education. Today, she will present improving violence-based, gender-based violence. Thank you very much, Leslie. The floor is yours. Thank you very much, Maciel. Thank you very much to the colleagues from SUMA for all the efforts you're making to build, exchange knowledge among different experiences and places we are all located. Thank you very much to everyone here, those who have taken the time to join us. And of course, I like to thank this team, this important team of the national coalitions, the CLADE, from CLADE participating in this process, and the regional CLADE office. And of course, the Alternatives colleagues, our ally, in this project because the process we've been doing is such a, well, it's that learning is such a tremendous learning space. That's what it really is. Human learning, theoretical learning, experiential learning, which I believe is changing the life of many. That was my starting point. Before sharing my screen, I have tried to literally answer the questions asked so I don't go around the bushes. Something I'm an expert in. So I would like to refer to the focus of this presentation and let me start sharing my screen. Can you see it? Yes? Okay, yeah, we see it perfectly. Very good. Our process, our project, I don't like calling it project because we leave it as a process rather than a project. It's called Strategies to Prevent Sexual and Gender Violence and Promote Equity in Rural Schools. We work in 3 countries, Haiti, Honduras, and Nicaragua. In each of these countries, in 2 rural communities, in which some educational communities in each of those territories. The first question we were asked is, how has the implementation of this initiative been like? And we have summarized this in this chart. We have supported and sustained this whole process in 4 key elements: learning communities, participatory action research, national research groups, and of course, gender focus or gender approach. So close to these components, approaches, perspective, strategies, there are some personal places of each of the team members from which we have tried and continue trying to advance in each of these strategies. And those places, on one hand, make us trust in ourselves and build with them, to recognize ourselves in, to train in the process, to reflect upon, to unlearn, observe and read, and return to learn in order to create new knowledge. I believe that this somehow synthesizes how we have implemented this initiative beyond the elements strictly technical or even political to implement this initiative. Who are the participating actors? That was the second question. So we have mentioned them here as a synthesis. Obviously, we participate as an organization, the CLADE as a regional organization, Alternatives as an allied, an expert allied, in gender from Canada, the para, the Para Todos Education Network from Honduras, and the Nicaragua Coalition for Education. They are the institutional supporters, and we all sustain this process. And the 3 groups, protagonists of all these paths, are the national research groups operating from the beginning of the project, the educational communities, and their territorial communities. Let's say the communities where these educational communities are located, with a very relevant role within this process. recovering this place of the school as part of the community, not as an annex to community, a space unrelated to community life, but on the contrary, as part of the community reality, presenting us challenges in relation to gender violence. And of course, the regional team of consultants and technical and technicians helping us day by day in the local and national processes. They are the key actors, the protagonists of the process we have been implementing. Third questions. Who facilitators and what obstacles have you found in the implementation? Okay, synthesizing this is easier than I previously said because there are plenty of actors and I have to prioritize them. Of course, you will find facilitators and obstacles. Then this is the synthesis I like to share with you. As facilitators, the tracking and trust in each national coalition, the profound professional linkage or bond we have established with the national teams enabling horizontal, clear, direct dialogues, precise and timely accompaniments, and besides having high-level teams working with us, methodologic rigorosity and capacity strengthening. These all have been a long path, as you can see. Our bet is on participatory action, and if you want to be consistent, this is a pretty demand action, pretty demanding for dialogue, for hearing capacity, collective building capacity, recognition of knowledge, validation of that knowledge. So we have taken care of the methodological approach, not to betray the methodological approach we have defined. We are aware it is difficult to facilitate this, but we haven't done that because we are betting on that approach as a key for a real transformation in educational communities. The other great facilitator are the alliances with the social organizations of women, and of course, with the educational community actors, and in some cases with the local entities of the government, mayors, well, authorities, as I said, local authorities in some cases. I have highlighted the alliances with social organizations of long-standing trajectory in those communities and territories, and particularly with the female organized collectives organized in those territories. As the process moves on, they have taken a more protagonist role in order to activate, appropriate of the methodology, and mobilize the work in the educational communities, and therefore replicating it in the territory to the family spaces, community spaces, and so on. Those are the great facilitators. And obviously, there are some obstacles, and we have identified clearly these fourth. Obviously, the conditions imposed by the pandemic to work in the field or in situ work, they forced us to invent participatory mechanisms without being in the field during the first 2 months of the project. That was a huge challenge. And then the national context, particularly as you well know, well, they are not easy contexts due to different reasons, and that has meant a challenge. The diverse degrees of what we call gender sensitivity. It's not the same level of sensitivity when it comes to gender, to openness for gender, to how difficult or easy it is to introduce the topic among the very diverse actors from the communities, and particularly from our own national teams with whom we have done a tremendous work in that sense. And as a consequence of COVID, return times for students to education communities. At the beginning of the project, we didn't have open schools, and that, of course, represented a difficulty and assumed methodological adaptations during the first stage of the process. And the last episode of chapter, how many minutes do I have left?
Vamos muy bien.
Okay, we're pretty good in
Donde
time.
quiera.
Very good. So
Sí.
everything is flowing perfectly. Well, the last chapter, as I said, is about learning. And here we have identified learning, prioritizing them by actors. Then, what had we learned? We have learned a great deal with the rural educational communities by recognizing their local capacities and creating bonds with community leaders, social organizations, centralized to educational rights, educational authorities, teachers, and students. This possibility to densify and help in the strengthening of community weaving as well as bonds which finally end up being a guarantee for sustainability in the cultural process we are betting on. Because we know that when we work with gender, what we are betting on is a profound cultural change for coexistence patterns, the way you look at the other, hierarchies and subordinations, which we need to break. Then this weaving strengthening seems substantial, and we have learned a lot from these organizations and communities with each local team and their beds on context. I would dare say that what we have learned most, among all, is the necessary flexibility demanded by this type of processes. That is, we all know that we have gone through very complex times due to pandemic as well as social situation or political situation, even safety issues. And we have also have to replan, reinvent new tools, new mechanisms of contact with the people by adapting ourselves to the context, everything we do. And that seems a learning that will remain in everyone's bodies involved in this process, and somehow it will mobilize options, life options, because this is what we believe. Gender matters, makes you make decisions on what you want to change, how you want to change it, and why you want to change it, and towards where you want to change it. With the generation of participatory action and traditional. There's something very important here, which is almost an obligation in the research participatory action approach, is that you need to take the time to build with others the methodological tools, to review them with others, to validate them with your peers, to reformulate them with your peers, and above all, to make them pertinent to the possibilities of each one. In this case, each of the educational communities where we were advancing the process. With the collective and community interpretation strategies in the data by gender approach, that's the stage we are in now. We are returning to the educational communities to read and interpret with a critic view the data we have created in the exploratory phase and the qualitative and quantitative exploratory phase. This is a highly relevant moment because this is the moment where communities themselves interpret what they have said, the data they have generated. And this means where are the factors playing a role, for example, in the violences identified by the different educational community actors. And beyond that, what's the prevention strategy then? The one that's most adapted to us, the one we can't move on, the one that will change this reality we have identified and now can understand, not justify, but understand. Why do we have to go through what's happening? What we will do jointly, what we will do together? That's a very important moment in this process and the one we will have in the coming months with an, I'm sorry, solid empirical data. Also has been important because in this gamble for participatory research action research, then it is important to have empirical data and evidence-based data. And through that, and try to process them rigorously and share that knowledge with the communities. And having data feeding incidence strategies. On the political aspect, we will take on a regional level. And I have finished my presentation. I hope it has been clear. I try to be very precise with questions and answers. And we have tried to evidence what we needed for this thing. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You were very precise in time and also very interesting what you were, how you were answering the questions. I'm gonna take away a lot of things, but in respect with the time and thinking of what you were saying about the components and thinking of the trust and creating the bond in the horizontal dialogue, I think they are highly relevant elements in every area. This is the way knowledge should work, and particularly when we refer to gender and generating these alliances with the organizations, with female organizations as well, and what then you returning to the community with the data, and is the community interpreting the data to generate strategies for prevention is a fundamental information, and it will be important to analyze it deeper because I believe that if it comes from the community, knowledge comes from there, that's where it really works. So thank you very much for your presentation. I would also like to thank all the participants, attendees here with us. Remind you that we will have a workshop and we'll have a more intimate space where we'll be able to introduce ourselves and getting to know each other. In respect of the time, I will go for the second speaker with us. She's Albina Lispo, co-founder of the On Continuum Association. Sabina is charged with designing different projects for the training of teachers of French as a foreign language in the Caribbean. She has also collaborated with the Francophonie, and she has been a promoter of the gender equality. What moves her to work with this subject in the region? She will present promoting gender equality at school. Sabina, welcome. Thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Bonjour, bonjour à tous. Alors, je vais
Good morning, everyone.
mon écran.
I will share my screen.
Ok, vous pouvez bien voir mon écran? Oui, ça va? Okay.
You can see my screen, right?
Tout d'abord, merci beaucoup de m'avoir
So first of all,
invité à
thank you
participer
very
aujourd'hui.
much. Thank you for this
C'est un
invitation.
plaisir pour moi, surtout que le
It is
projet
a
dont je vais vous parler,
great pleasure for me to be here because this
dans
project
les
I will
premières
tell you
étapes,
about,
on est juste en train de commencer en fait à travailler dessus.
it is at
On a déjà
its
fait toute
third
la
stage.
partie
We're just beginning.
préparatoire, on peut
We're
dire.
starting to work on it.
On est ravis de
We have done all of the
avec
preparation, let's say it that way,
sur ce projet-là.
and we're pleased
Donc,
to cooperate with
c'est une
Kix,
opportunité
at Kix with this project. So
Notre
thank you very
objectif,
much
c'est
for
de
this
pouvoir
opportunity. Our project, it is called Promoting Gender Equality in Schools, and I will explain the way we're working on it, what we have been doing in order to start this project. Together, we will see the identification of problems, the conception of the project, and later we'll come back to our experience and what it motivated us to create this project. So first of all, a brief introduction of our association.
Mais on
We're
a
an
travaillé
association
les pays de la
placed in
Caraïbe,
Martinica. We have worked in the Caribbean countries, especially in Santa Lucia,
pays de la Caraïbe
St. Lucia, in cooperation with other countries in Caribbean,
et en particulier, on
French-speaking
travaille
countries. So
avec
we have the experience on
professeurs
site. We have
de
worked
l'éducation
with teachers at the
pour la formation
ministries
des
of
professeurs de
education
français.
for the training of teachers
Et en
of
plus de
French.
ça, on conçoit et on mène différents
Besides all
projets
that,
internationaux
we
sur
also
différentes thématiques. Donc ce projet
develop
porte
many
sur les
different
thématiques de l'égalité des
international
genres.
projects on different
On a
topics
déjà travaillé sur
related to equality.
littérature
And we have also
québécoise
worked
et on travaille actuellement sur un autre projet
with this
plutôt sur
plurilanguage
l'environnement et le développement durable.
literature.
Donc,
We have also worked in environment and sustainable development projects.
alors, tout d'abord, donc, comment est-ce qu'on a fait pour identifier les différents
So,
problèmes sur lesquels
what
travailler?
have we done to identify this
Il
problem?
y a eu plusieurs étapes dans ce cheminement et dans cette
There are many
identification.
stages
La première
in
étape,
this
c'est
road,
une
in this path
formation
of
qu'on a pu faire
identification.
avec
First of all,
l'IFEF, donc
we have a
l'Institut
training
francophone
that we have
de
done
l'éducation
with
et de la
LIFER,
formation,
the
qui est un organe de
Training Institute,
coopération internationale de la
French.
francophonie. Donc, ils
It
travaillent
is one
ensemble
part
et
of the bigger
depuis,
institution we
moi,
work
je suis
together.
maintenant tutrice pour leur formation
And I am
et ça
currently
m'a permis de
a
prendre
tutor for the
conscience de
training.
l'importance de l'égalité
And
des
therefore, I
genres,
have been aware of
de
how
ce
important it
concept
is
comme
gender equality,
l'homme caché,
especially
le
at
rôle des
schools. The
professeurs
concept of this
dans
hidden curriculum, the role of teachers,
l'égalité, dans la lutte contre les stéréotypes,
when talking about
sexisme,
equality,
etc.
the struggle against
Donc,
stereotypes,
ça,
sexism, and so
c'était
on.
l'année dernière, en
So
juillet 2021.
that was done last year in
Ensuite,
July
progressivement,
2021.
j'ai analysé la situation dans la Caraïbe avec des recherches en ligne par rapport à ce que je pouvais trouver. C'est pas
So
toujours
after this
facile
training, I
d'avoir
also
des
analyzed
documents
data in the
fiables
Caribbean.
dans tous les pays
It is not
récents
easy
aussi.
to have reliable
On
data
reviendra
and
dessus.
recent data in the Caribbean. So
Et ensuite,
we'll
on
come
a
back on that topic later.
évidemment pris connaissance de
And
l'appel
we have
à
also
projet
taken,
organisé par
or we
l'EDF
have known
et on a souhaité
about
faire une
this KICS
proposition
project,
en
and
disant
we
que
have
c'était
shown
similaire à notre
the
niveau
desire
de
of
pouvoir
making a
maintenant
proposal,
réellement
working
rencontrer les
at
élèves et les
our level in
professeurs.
order to have a real
Et enfin, donc,
impact
on a été
in
sélectionné
teachers and also in
à la phase de
students.
début du projet, donc
And at the
planification,
very end, we were
création,
selected.
discussion avec les
And
ministères
therefore, we are
compétents,
in this
etc.
initial stage of the project. We're having this conversation and debate with local
Donc, on a
stakeholders and so on.
utilisé les ressources,
The documents
il y a
that we have
plusieurs
used
rapports,
and the
par
resources,
exemple le report on the
we
comprehensive
have
national
found
development
plenty of
plan for St.
reports. For
Lucia for the
instance,
implementation of the
this
regime
report that was mentioned at the beginning of this list,
du gouvernement de Sainte-Lucie, mais aussi des rapports
it is a report by the St.
à l'échelle
Lucia
plus
government
globale,
administration and also some
par
reports
exemple Closing
at
Gender Gaps
a
in
wider
Latin and the
scale.
Caribbean
For
by the World
instance,
Bank,
a
ou encore
report by the
Women
World
Justice
Bank
Movements Gaining Traction
about
in the Caribbean,
closing gender gaps in
OHRC,
Latin America and the Caribbean,
des
or
supports
about
sur le
women
traitement
in business
et des rapports
and
du Fonds monétaire
management,
mondial comme
which
le
is
rapport sur l'éducation de l'UNESCO
more
et des sites
centered
importants
in work,
et pour
and
lesquels on
another
fait partie
UNESCO
de
report
World Bank
related
Monitoring,
to
qui est très
global
aussi pour
education
avoir
monitoring
un aperçu de la situation
report related to education.
Ces
And there's
différents
another
documents
World Bank document that
vont
gives us some
pouvoir tirer des
view of
conclusions
the
de la
situation.
situation
And I
dans
have
le
used these documents in order to have
et ça m'a amené à quelques
and in
constats.
order to know and to have information about
Dans la Caraïbe,
this topic
contrairement
we're going to work on.
à
This
d'autres
led me
pays,
to
les filles
some
réussissent bien à l'école, elles réussissent mieux dans
situations in the
l'éducation en
Caribbean.
général et elles sont plus diplômées. Donc
Different from
ça,
some other countries in the world,
ça peut
women
aussi conduire
have
certains,
good results here.
certaines
That is
personnes à
something
penser tout
positive.
va bien dans la Caraïbe, l'égalité,
Girls
ça fonctionne bien, il n'y a pas de problème.
have
Et en fait,
better
on
results,
se rend
performance
compte
at
que
school,
les
and they get
inégalités
more certificates, diplomas. So this may lead us to think that everything is okay in the Caribbean, but inequality occur afterwards in the job market. Women there are only 27% of the company managers in the Caribbean. If we consider this at a global scale, that is positive because at a global level, the same participation at the same level, it is only 5%. And women usually have little representation at a political level. And that happens at a global level, and we can also see it in the Caribbean. But this school success does not translate into the work environment. Therefore, we need to promote, I mean, for women, for girls, to address some other type of courses, careers. Nowadays, they are more guided towards jobs related to healthcare. They usually work as assistants uh, in schools, but there aren't really many entrepreneurship amongst women. They're not working in science, informatics, for instance. Another example, if we talk about women at the parliament, the problem in the Caribbean is that the situations vary so much. For instance, they have Grenada, almost with a party in the parliament, but St. Lucia and Antigua, Barbuda are really far away to this parity. So it is hard to talk about in general terms, but if we get an average, we still have work to do. From these conclusions, we are also willing to build a project with many different goals. The first one was working with teachers because that's where we have more experience. We have we have worked with teachers in the Caribbean for quite a long time. So teachers get this gender equality perspective and they included it into their curriculum, this hidden curriculum as well. They have to value these feminine models, these feminine roles, female roles. And in that way, they should build strategies in order to promote equality between men and women. We also want to promote, I mean, girls to choose different type of jobs. So we can motivate them to choose different jobs. I mean, they should work in science for them to be entrepreneurs. So they're more independent and they're more economically independent. We want to invite local stakeholders. So, I mean, for this project, not to be on just one or to go in just one direction. We don't want to be an institution coming into a country and then leaving. We want to involve the local stakeholders so later they can all continue with the project. So they keep on acting and working with schools, and even without our presence, without them needing from our help. So that will allow to create some relationships, connections between students, local shareholders, associations, and amongst schools, teachers, so they can continue reinforcing their connections, their relations. And we also had a fourth goal of promoting social justice. That was part of the project as well. And we decided to concentrate in schools, rural schools with fewer opportunities. In the Caribbean, the system it is a little bit different if we compare it with France. In France, there's no much of a classification of school. So people choose the school according to the place where they live. In the Caribbean, it is different. There are schools which have a better classification, better standard, better where students get the better marks, and there are some others where the situation is harder, where they don't have as many possibilities as others. So with this project, we wanted to concentrate in schools which are not in the capital cities, which were in, let's say, more remote areas, where students have less opportunities. to access to higher education, for instance.
l'organisation de notre
So these were the
scolaire.
four pillars,
Et
priority
voici donc les
pillars
activités
of
que
our
nous avons
project.
prévues pour
And these are the activities that we
procéder.
have foreseen.
On va commencer par une
In
formation
order
en
to
ligne
implement the project, we're going to
enseignant le
start
français langue
with
étrangère
an online
portant
training
sur les
for
questions
teachers,
du genre,
teachers of French as a foreign language.
par exemple le
And that
curriculum,
is going to
l'utilisation de
start,
l'espace, la création de ressources pédagogiques.
and it's going to include
Un guide
the
multilingue
creation of
qui
some
sera
pedagogical resources. We have also
essentiellement une
planned a
formation en ligne,
guideline,
mais qui sera également adapté
multilingual guideline,
et en
which
version
is going
numérique.
to cover
Ça
this
nous permettra
online
également de travailler la justice sociale
elements,
sur
and we're going to have this
les
digital
enseignants,
also
parce qu'il y a des
on
enseignants
paper format.
qui
With that, we'll work with social justice at a teacher's level, because there are some teachers
certaines villes, à la
who
Dominique, qui a été très touchée par
do not have
un ouragan, c'est pas
electricity
forcément facile
available
pour
all
eux
day long.
d'utiliser leur téléphone.
Dominica
C'est pas
was
forcément facile de pouvoir
struck by a
s'éconnecter
hurricane,
sur
so they
Internet,
don't
sur
have
Internet
electricity all day
correctement.
long.
Ils auront
And it is
besoin
hard for them to connect in order to
pour s'y
follow
repérer.
this
Et
training
ça nous
course.
permet également
They will always
d'avoir
have
beaucoup plus
guidelines, printed
d'enseignants, puisqu'on pourra
guidelines,
avoir les enseignants
and that will allow
de
us to include
langue
more teachers.
anglaise et espagnole également. Donc tout
And
cet aussi,
also, we will also have
actuellement une très
teachers
établie
working in
à
their
Sainte-Lucie, la
mother
Dominique,
tongue,
Saint-Vincent,
in
les Grenadines
French,
et la Grenade. Donc,
or also in
un
Spanish.
guide en
We also
espagnol
work
et en
with
français nous
Saint
permettra
Vincent
d'accéder
and the
aux villes
Grenadines, Grenada,
francophones.
and
Et
this
ensuite, donc,
will allow us
les
to be
week-ends vont
present
ensuite
in
organiser
some
des ateliers dans
islands
quelques écoles pilotes, donc 3 par ville pour
where
l'instant,
they speak Spanish.
animés par des
And we
personnalités
also want to
locales.
implement some
Et
workshops in some pilot
l'objectif de ces
schools.
ateliers, c'est vraiment
They're
de
going to be
montrer aux jeunes
led by some local
leur
personalities. The
partager
goal of
aussi
these workshops is
leur
teaching young
diversité.
people, and also especially girls,
Donc, on a choisi
for
des
them to
personnalités qui travaillent dans l'éducation
access to
nationale,
different types of jobs. So we have
pour
chosen personalities,
l'éducation des filles ou
famous
pour
people that already work in these fields, and
pour
therefore they work for
l'inclusion des
the
filles
inclusion of girls,
dans les pays ou
autonomy
des
of
domaines un
girls
petit
and
peu
women in those countries.
non conventionnels pour les
Or
femmes.
sometimes we choose people who work in non-conventional
Il y a
fields for
aussi des
women.
acteurs
For
qui
instance,
seront impliqués dans le projet,
these are some of
qui
the
travaillent
stakeholders which are going
avec
to
des
participate in the
professeurs ou
project. We're going to
des
work
professeurs
with
qui
an
ont réalisé
officer's curriculum
îles du projet.
in these
On
4
travaillera également
islands
avec des
where the project is
associations
going to be
de
carried
professeurs,
out.
donc je les ai
We're going to
consultés
work with
lors de la création
teachers
du
associations,
projet
as
sur plusieurs points, c'est-à-dire
French
pour identifier
teachers
les écoles
associations, in order to identify the
parce que je
schools,
n'ai pas une connaissance de toutes les
which
écoles des 4 pays, donc je leur ai
which are
demandé
the most important ones,
quelles
because we don't really know all of the schools in the 4
étaient
countries.
les plus
So
intéressantes pour ce
we have
projet-là.
asked them
Et je leur ai
which
également demandé
would be
d'identifier
the most
des
interesting
personnes,
school
des personnalités
for
pour
this
travailler
project.
avec
And I
l'organisation
asked
pour ce
them
projet. Donc, on
if they could
travaillera
help me to
également avec des
identify
associations de professeurs.
some local people who
Pour
could
les
also
personnalités locales, on a
be
trouvé par exemple
interesting
une
for
fille à
this project.
Sainte-Lucie
And
qui
for these
travaille avec la
people,
réalité
we
virtuelle
have Joe
avec
Lavis
des élèves.
in
Donc,
St. Lucia,
ça nous a,
working with
ça
virtual
nous a
reality with
montré que c'était
students.
possible d'être une femme et de développer
This may show girls that it is
des
possible to be a
apprentissages
woman
et dans les
and
technologies
also
aussi.
developing
Sokagia,
and
c'est
working
une personne et
in
aussi
the
une association à
technology
Saint-Vincent qui
field.
travaille
We also
beaucoup
have Soka Gyal in St. Vincent and the Grenadines,
l'émancipation des femmes, le fait que les femmes deviennent des entrepreneurs aussi.
working with the
Et
empowerment of
ensuite, dans
women.
la Dominique,
So women can start some entrepreneurship. And we also have Lyra Fabian for Dominica.
aux filles
And she
pour,
speaks,
les
she, I mean,
motiver
gives
à
lectures for
suivre des
girls to
parcours
motivate
un
them,
peu différents.
and also
Ensuite, en
promoting
Grenade, on est en train de travailler pour ça
some
avec
careers or courses which are not so conventional. And in the Granada,
d'identifier.
we are also working with this officer curriculum, which is identifying
Pour le planning,
persons.
comme je vous ai dit, on est encore au début du projet, donc c'est pour ça que ma présentation est un peu différente.
The calendar, the timeline that we have, we're at the initial stage of the project. I cannot tell you much about the results, about the actions that we have developed, but this is the timeline, provisional planning. We are wording the guideline. We're writing it. In February, March, we're going to have some workshops in schools. And we will have some training, which is going to start in January. So in our experience, we are working having as a base our former experiences, especially for the online training. We have done many courses, online courses, so we're experienced on that. We also have experience in the cooperation with different countries in terms of management of international projects. We have also cooperated with 10 countries, training teachers, and working with this DALF examination in high school. We have also we have experience of accompaniment. We have accompanied more than 350 teachers. And we also have some experience in the conception of pedagogical, creation of pedagogical resources. I write some pedagogical files, reports, we work with designers and pedagogical teams. And thanks to all of this, we have an idea of the difficulties, potential difficulties of this project. For instance, in the cooperation with ministries and moving teachers, I mean, that may one of the biggest problems because ministries always have many things to do. Teachers also have plenty of things to do. So we have seen that there's an overload of work for teachers. And sometimes they have little motivation. Sometimes it is hard to move them. And in our project, we have chosen and we have decided to concentrate in 10 teachers per country. We're going to have a small number, but we want to make sure that they're going to be motivated to follow our training. And then later, the duration of this training and this workload that needs to be adapted to all of the participants. Sometimes it is hard for teachers to follow an online training in their free time. They have their own families, they have work to do, and we need to adapt the training for it not to be an overload, not to overwhelm teachers. Thirdly, the management of the training platform and the way of using it by the participant. So they can also use the different tools, technological tools available in the platform. We need to work on that for it to be easy to understand, friendly. Fourth point, interactivity of contents and follow-up of the participants. When we do some online training, it is fundamental, essential to have a good follow-up. Without that, participants may get lost. They may lose motivation. And finally, we are having interventions in different schools that is a little bit more related to administrative elements. We need to have the agreement from directors of schools, from the ministry as well. So therefore, we have some difficulties there, and we have included all of these potential difficulties. So those are the difficulties that we have foreseen, and in order to finish, we think in this project as a first, I mean, we're working on a first stage and we want to continue with it. We'd like to have the translation of it so more teachers and more countries can also work with it in different countries. So they have a second alternative of training. We should also work with more schools for each of the workshops. So once the first workshops have been or have started, teachers may have had these gatherings with some local authorities. So in this was going to be easier to promote these workshops in some other places, in some other cities. So it is possible. We can apply this in different countries. We can even create some networks at the Caribbean scale where there are many things that may be started. So I believe that we're going to go to the Q&A session, right? Thank you very much. It was a really interesting presentation. So now we're going to go to a Q&A session. If you have questions, observations, or comments, we're going to give the floor to all of the participants. Sabrina, thank you very much for this. It's been really interesting. There are some challenges. Motivation of teachers. This work load that may be excessive, the fatigue that may be related to this virtuality. So there's a huge challenge over there. And the other big challenge is this work with the ministries, with authorities in each of the countries. They should be able to understand what is being done, the importance of this gender training for teachers, and there should be any misinterpretation. The decontraction, it is important. We need to have this decontraction, and we need to inform and train in relation to gender. So now we'll give the floor. Herman and Winnie had some comments there in the chat. I don't know if you'd like to take the floor. Winnie, you have a question over there?
Hola, buenos días, gracias.
Good morning, and thank you.
Sí, bueno, estaba escuchando
Well, I was listening to the presentation. It's been quite interesting. And
planteabas cómo todos
you
los
mentioned how all of the schools and countries you have worked with
también el acompañamiento
and this accompaniment that was provided to teachers. So my question is, I don't know, it would be interesting to know the type of inputs you have received from each of the countries or the people you have worked with, and how this has contributed, how this has contributed to the transformation, adaptation of the material methodologies, what initial ideas you had in the project, and how these have been transformed from the context and the contributions of the people who are participating in the project itself. Thank you, Winnie. So Nelson, Sabrina, would like to answer Winnie's comment. Nancy, maybe start with you.
Es que no estoy segura si Winnie quiere
I am not
preguntar.
quite sure whether Winnie would like to ask me or Sabrina.
¿Qué es lo que te interesa más, Winnie?
What are you interested in answering? I mean, in asking. Each one of you, it is to you. To you is the question, yes. I'm sorry. You mentioned was the last speaker. Yeah, I thought so, due to the type of question. No, everything is fine. Well, with the mix of languages, sometimes it's confusing. Then the question I would like to see if you can tell me the type of contribution you have from the territories you have worked, which have included, well, the knowledge you recognize as transformative for your methodological process.
Ok. Alors, attendez, je désactive mon... Ok. Donc,
Okay, let me deactivate the language.
Moi, j'ai habité personnellement à Sainte-Lucie pendant 2 ans et demi. Donc,
well, I lived for 2.5 years in Santa Lucia, so that knowledge allowed me to confirm some things directly from first hand when I was living in the country. Then when this collaboration with the ministries, you collaborate in the arrangements of the preparation. Then with this project, I presented them the ideas and the activities regarding the planning, and we saw that jointly whether it was feasible on the side of teachers training, which was most interesting for them. But they didn't really modify some of the things. They accepted the work and they stated it was very interesting and it was perfect for their country and it was going to help the teachers. And on the level of methodology, then it means that they didn't want to modify some of the things for that part of the project, for the training. At the same time, they enroll at the same time of teachers to precisely help from the ministry to teachers to manage the workload in a better way and have a better return. then we had the benefit of this return in a different way the ministries had. And that was reflected on the content. Probably they had a big lot of work, but generally speaking, this feedback, this return was highly positive. That is, from the ministries, there was no a great modification by them to our planning. However, regarding the Teachers Association or Teachers College, who provided us with the knowledge in field, because we didn't have the specific knowledge for each of those, then they indicated as, for example, that some of the concepts were not well adapted. People from the ministry told us, be careful if you will talk about reproductive rights of gender or transsexuals in general. So there was a point when there was a kind of reluctancy by the ministries regarding the planning. They were scared of having the feedback by parents for training. It was a training for teachers, not for students. Then we noticed some apprehensions because they told us we were in the Caribbean countries, and there were certain or some apprehensions that needed to be considered. For example, reproduction rights that requires to be readdressed because it's an important subject. There is an important number of adolescents pregnancies. I cannot define it exactly. We will talk about it, but we cannot do advertising or to disseminate it that much. I don't know if I have answered the question. Thank you very much for your answer. They are similar realities in the region. It makes a lot of sense when we think about the Latin America and the Caribbean and how we articulate and how our reality is so common. Jenny, you have a comment on the chat. Would you like to say it, please? The floor is yours. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes, they are very similar realities. I was willing to ask Sabrina if they have a resistance, but she already answered that. She referred to the resistance. So I would like to ask Melcy if the empirical data in her research has been returned to the community. It is important to have all that data. We have made an analysis of the training processes in gender to know the changes in attitude, practice, resistance. So I would like to know the experience they may have had when they got that data and they return into the educational institution, whether they analyze the data or a remaking of the data. Thank you very much, Jenny. Precisely, I was telling you that at that point, national teams are about to return to the communities with the data to do the exercise of data interpretation along with the communities and the beginning of prevention strategies based on the data and the interpretation built with the community actors and the territory. Because as I told you, there's also social organizations of the territory committed in the process. Then on how we will do, I will have to tell you in a coming event. But, well, with pleasure, I will tell you. Well, maybe we can share, well, here in El Salvador, we can share what we do. And as Sabrina was saying, she talked about the realities. That was the question, if they have seen some reluctancy. And you mentioned gender sensitivity, working with that. So I believe that among all the people involved in this community, we can reinforce because that's a relevant role. Thank you very much. Then I will ask it one more question. Can I make a comment about resistance? Absolutely, yes.
Nosotros sentimos que, digamos, que
We
hay
feel
resistencias que pueden ser muy,
there are some
muy
resistances that
obvias,
might be very
¿no? Te
obvious
acercas y pones la cuestión de
when you refer to
con
this
ese
gender
tipo de resistencias
subject.
obvias,
With
nosotros
that
no hemos
type of
encontrado
obvious
mucho.
resistance, we
Tengo
have
que
not
decir,
encountered much. I need to
más
be
bien hemos
honest.
encontrado
What
bastante
we have
apertura
found is
de las comunidades
openness
educativas,
by
de
the
los
educational
profesores,
communities,
a
by all
hablar
the
del tema,
actors,
a
to
ponerlo
talk
sobre la
about the
mesa,
subject, to
a
put
hablar
it
de
on
las
the table,
violencias que
to
perciben e
refer to
identifican,
violences they
a
have
todo eso.
perceived and identified.
Así que eso nos parece interesante porque
That
también
seems
se habla
interesting because
es como una señal, ¿no?
it's like a
De
signal, I
avance, de
would
que
say, it's an
algo sí
advancement
se ha
or
movido, digamos,
progress
si lo miramos
signal.
20
Is
años
something that
atrás,
has moved on if we compare it with
digamos,
what
algo
used
se ha
to happen
movido.
20 years ago. So I
Sin
can
embargo,
say
creemos
we
que
have
tenemos que estar
progressed,
muy
we have
alerta
made
porque
progress,
hay
but we
otras
need to be
resistencias
alert
que no son
because there's other
evidentes,
resistances which are not evident,
pero que probablemente
but
salgan
probably
al
they
momento
may
de
emerge
pensar las estrategias de prevención.
at the moment of thinking of
¿Por qué?
prevention
Porque
strategies.
hay
And
unas
why is that?
prácticas
Because
de
there are
violencia normalizadas,
normalized
completamente
violence
normalizadas,
practices, completely normalized.
que puede ser que en el momento
And it might be that
que puedan sentirse
at
interpeladas,
the
por eso hay que
point
cuidar tanto el
you might
lenguaje,
feel
el
identified.
modo
This
de
is why we
aproximación
need to
y
take
todos
care
los
of the language and the
detalles, digamos, pueden
approach
saltar
mode, and all those
de eso.
details may emerge as
Entonces,
resistance.
digamos que es casi como día a día.
So I would say that it is a day-by-day
Comunidad por
task
comunidad
and
y actor
community
por
by
actor,
community
porque
and
luego
actor
se
by
pasa con los
actor,
docentes
because
y eso pasa con las docentes, pero
something that
eso
happens
pasa
with
con
the male
los
teachers can
niños y
happen
las
with the
niñas,
female
con
teachers.
los
Same
adolescentes,
things,
las
girls,
adolescentes, en
boys,
fin, que hay que
adolescents,
ir como
female and male.
estando
So we need
atentas a
to
las
be
resistencias
attentive and pay attention to
que
the
pueden
resistances
surgir
that may
en
arise
lugar de las
from
prácticas violentas
the
normalizadas.
playtest of these normalized violent practices.
Eso.
This is it.
Muchas gracias, Nelcy, por tu
Thank you very much,
Quisiera saber si alguien más
Nesty, for your
tiene
comments. I
alguna
would like to know if
pregunta
someone
después
else. We are
de Marina. Nos
closing this
quedaríamos un ratito
webinar.
más.
Okay, we could stay here forever because it's a pretty interesting subject, but we will have a workshop where we'll be divided in working groups and we will deepen here. Anyway, the mic is open in case you want to ask a question or make a comment. If this is not the case, can we turn our cameras because we'll have a picture taken of this event. Please turn your cameras on for a while and Carol will tell us when the pictures will be taken so that we can smile. Please turn your cameras on. Thank you very much.
Un segundo. Okay, thanks.
Súper. Muchas gracias. Gracias a todos y todas por prender sus
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for turning your cameras on. Thank you very much for your participation in this important space. We'd like to contribute with the dissemination of this gender subject. This webinar, as I told you, is under the framework of our practice communities, and you are invited to be part of it. They are monthly meetings where we deepen on these gender perspectives. Thank you very much to Nestle and the other speaker for presenting such an important things. There are several questions that remain pending, but we can work on them during the workshop. Territory diversity, Honduras, Nicaragua, Haiti, working with the Eastern Caribbean is pretty interesting what we see here. And of course, you are invited to continue on for the coming workshop. Any comment? You can write it on the chat box. Thank you very much to everyone.
Hasta luego, gusto verles.
Ana Marta, un gusto.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much. See you later. How was your trip back to home? Everything's fine. Everything's fine. I'm very pleased of having been with you. See you later. Thank you very much, Jenny. Thank you. My regards to everyone for sharing this space. For the next workshop, do we have to stay here? Do we have to stay on? Okay, stay here. Okay, we will all stay here. And then we'll be divided in the rooms depending on the amount of people staying here.
Nosotros seguimos en estado de emergencia, así que cualquier cosa yo voy a estar hasta donde pueda.
We are still under emergency state. Tell us how everything is there. There was that now is a tropical warning. Classes are being canceled. And we are in this emergency state, but still fine. This is why I cannot participate fully. I'm still here though.
Ya. Bueno, vamos a esperar un par de minutos más.
We'll wait for a couple of minutes to start with the next block, which is the workshop Maciel was telling you about. In 2 more minutes, we will kick off.
Bueno, vamos a comenzar entonces. Nuevamente, bienvenidas y bienvenidos. Esta es la segunda sesión de la comunidad de práctica de perspectiva en igualdad de género en la educación pública.
In public education, let me remind you the general purpose of this community, and is to facilitate meeting spaces to share experiences and mobilize knowledge about gender equality perspective in public education. We have just had a webinar where 2 people, 2 speakers, share their experiences in the territories about initiatives regarding the gender equality perspective. Now we have a space for analysis and debate over the process of design and implementation of an intervention of initiative based on the identification of an educational problem with a gender equality perspective. The indications are Here, we will be divided into rooms. You will be assigned a room according to your language. Some people speak Spanish in this space, so there will be a room with interpretation in this different languages. So you will receive an invitation to join the room, and that's where the indications will be given to work. When time is over in the room, we will be back at the main room and we'll have a session close. Let me make a small comment. Finally, due to methodology and technical, finally we won't be divided into rooms. I'm sorry, so we will all stay here. Okay, so we are all here in the room and we'll start. We will ask you a brief introduction round. Maybe if you don't want to talk, you can use the chat so that we can get to know each other and we can identify who we are here, because this is a more intimate space for conversation. So please introduce yourself. I will start. I am Fernanda del Pozo, and I'm one of the KICS researchers. It's a pleasure to have you all here, and please continue by opening your mic and introducing yourself. Good morning. My name is Ursula Castillo. I'm from Guatemala. I work for the Puentes project of Saying World Vision, and we have the component of gender as one of the cross-sectional axes, and we work with adolescents and youngsters. And I'm the coordinator of this cross-axis. Good morning.
Buenos días. Sí, bueno, mi nombre es Giovanna.
Good morning, I'm Giovanna. I am part of the regional team here in this project that Nelsie just presented. So I'm greeting you all from Brazil. Good morning, I am Jenny Rivas from El Salvador. I am the manager, gender manager of the Ministry of Education, and as a main goal, we have implementing this gender equality policy in the national educational system. Good morning. I am Maria Angelica Morales Enamorado, consultant for education consultant, supporting this implementation process that Guatemala had in the World Alliance for Education. So I am supporting in all of the aspects related to the strategic approach for the subvention of the Alliance. This includes gender approach in its as one of the main pillars, of course. Hello, I am Nelsie Litarazzo, General Coordinator of CLADE. It is a pleasure for me to be here. You met me, so I had introduced myself before. Good morning. I am Ricardo Lopez from Nicaragua. I work at the Research Center Social. Thank you very much. I am Taniuska Gutierrez, Executive of the Innovation Direction of UNAM Managua in Nicaragua. I am representing Violeta Gago. I am participating here in order to contribute in this relevant topic related to gender equality. Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else willing to introduce he or herself? If not, we're going to ask with the Q&A session. Well, you know me. but I'd like to introduce myself. I am Maciel Morales. I am an art teacher, PhD in education, and I'm also a KICS researcher. I am really happy to be here sharing with Fernanda and all of you this, practice community session. Especially concentrated in gender.
Hello, everyone. I keep getting bumped off. I'm Michelle Brathwaite. I'm from Grenada. I am the local focal point for the KICS LAC. My interest is inclusive practices, inclusive education, thus my interest in the gender issues. I am here also to learn and to share information as well as necessary. I'm happy to be part of the presentation today.
Thank you, Michelle.
Gracias, Michelle. Well then, so we're going to continue. There are many other people here who are participating from Haiti and some other places, different countries. But, well, if you wish to introduce yourself in the chat box, you can do it. So we're going to continue with this work session. Thank you very much. Thank you for all of the ones who introduced themselves. So this is a space for debate. So what we're going to do is I will ask some questions, and the idea here is that all of you can participate, and we're going to take notes. We will take notes in our PowerPoint so we can see, analyze your answers, and we can build a knowledge in a collective fashion. So now you can raise your hand in order to participate, and I will give you the floor. Raise your virtual hand, or if not, you can also write in the chat box, and we will process all of the things that you write down over there. You can also participate. Presenters, speakers can also participate, of course. And we're going to start with this design of an initiative. There's an identification of a problem that is the very base, and we want to talk how this process it is like with a gender equality perspective. So we're going to give the floor to us. What elements do you think are necessary or are necessary to include in this initiative design of teachers training with a gender equality perspective? We're working on this because we are working with teachers, both men and women. So we're going to start with this question. If someone wants to make some comments about which elements are necessary to consider, to include when designing a teachers training with a gender equality perspective. Is there anyone there willing to take the floor? Good morning. I believe that one of the elements to be considered would be the profile of the teacher, the requirements for each of the teachers. It will be interesting to keep that in mind. Which are the requirements which different ministries have in order to hire a teacher, the profile, professional profile, visibility, and experience of the teacher. Thank you. Thank you very much.
¿Me escucha?
Can you hear me?
Sí.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Pero yo quisiera
I'd like to
tal vez hacer
maybe also think about or make a reflection about the last presentation that was shown about how you see the possibility of working beforehand with the institutional teams or medium hierarchies. I am clear that this teacher promotion it is fundamental, but I don't know how far or how possible it is to work in a formative way with also the decision makers. So I'd like to mention that as a reflection, as a thought, it will be interesting to see what their experience is, and it will be interesting to see what the situation is like in all of our countries and how this is going to be interpreted and how this will be implemented in all of the different countries in this field of education. Thank you very much. I would try to mention two important axes from the experience that we have had. One is, of course, trying to find the construction of a curriculum which addresses the multiple inequalities that we're having or we're considering in this gender topic. And we need to deconstruct some myths around the topic. We know that that opens the curriculum. I mean, there's another box being opened, right? Which is also quite big and important. But not only that, that is one line that we need to consider, but there are some other lines that we have learned a lot in our project, which is also moving our own experiences, experiences of teachers, what they have seen in their schools, what they have lived, and therefore we need to reflect and think about the things that they have lived in their own experiences. Thank you. I'd like to add to what Giovanna has said. Well, you know that the project we are at, it is not aimed in teachers training itself. Nonetheless, teachers are the core actors in this type of transformations in the classroom and educational communities, and beyond that, of course. So we're clear about that. And I'd like to add to what Giovanna has said, that before being teachers, teachers are persons, right? And that is a factor that we cannot forget. We must not forget in the work when we're working with the educational communities. Teachers, I mean, they are not defined by its function, even though it is really important, but they are defined as persons and they have life experiences. And in relation to gender, they live the gender issues and difficulties in their own lives. They are not away from those problems. They are not away from gender violence. They do not have biographies. I mean, they have lived this gender violence. Teachers, women teachers, female teachers, in their lives, they have lived those experiences as well. So we should not forget that, because when we are getting in touch with them, we're also getting in touch with persons. They are teachers, right? And that is something fundamental in a transformation like the one we're seeking for. Thank you, Nelsie. Jenny? Thank you. Yes, what you have mentioned is so very important. As Minister of Education, we have a whole process of training for teachers. And always thinking that, I mean, the problems that they may face. I remembered, I mean, how long we have been working on this teachers training, how important it is to have this curriculum innovation. We need it to be centered in methodological elements. They want to change the person first. So we start by I mean, they have a hidden curriculum. We assume that they also have some cultural roots, religious roots, which are so embedded. And we need to work this teachers training with methodologies which do not have or are not colliding. We need to work from all of those cultural backgrounds. It is important to work with this sensitiveness. We need to create these elements from our cultural experiences. We need to consider and include that many of them do not see or visualize the need because of the naturalization of some elements. I mean, this gender balance. So therefore, in order to build or construct a process based in gender, we need to start by curriculum innovation, but also from the person. We need to start from the person, the individual teachers who are living this process. We also have this, they have faced their problems and they do not know how to solve them. Thank you. Anyone else willing to share or contribute with some ideas?
Bueno, recogimos algunos elementos.
So we have gathered some interesting things over here. Something key over here, it is what you have commented. Different people mentioned the need of considering the person, the subject, I mean, teacher, both men or women. We need to consider and include the experience that they have lived when they are facing this promotion of this new approach. It is important because these people have lived some situations all through their lives, and sometimes they have faced different gender violence. So we're working with that. So this is quite interesting. Is there anyone else willing to contribute some more, or shall we go to our next question related to implementation? We also need to think when we're training teachers, we need to think that we need to visualize the families. The families of students are also important. So teachers should be aware of this. They sometimes change their mindset, and that's why it is important to include families, because teachers will also need some support from the families. Thank you. This is going to be connected with our next question, which is related to implementation. So let's go to our next question. About challenges of the implementation. Here we have, what challenge may you identify in the implementation of these initiatives that have been shown? Some of them were mentioned already. Nancy mentioned one related to this, I mean, the process they are working at. Maybe we may think in some other initiatives or experiences that you may have, I mean, people here, about projects, programs, or initiatives with gender equality perspective, and what type of challenge we have found or faced when implementing these initiatives. We have identified some of them already. For instance, when you mentioned that working with students means working with family at the same time. And I want to ask you, I mean, I'd like to, let's see if Nelson can go deeper into this concept of gender sensibility that we're working. How can we work with it in the implementation? Anyways, I'm going to open the floor because maybe there's some other elements which are relevant in your opinion, especially at the implementation of these initiatives. Is there anyone else? Good morning. I'm talking from my personal experience as a teacher. In these professional courses and also in the classrooms, we always want to have gender equality, and we want to integrate girls, boys and girls. They can join freely to any courses, and they can also participate in different activities at the different faculties or university or at a national level. They should also be part, it should be mandatory in all of those courses to have a woman, a doctor, an engineer. But sometimes we see a challenge, which is that people feel intimidated. Women feel intimidated when they see women getting empowered. So that also creates some rejection, that also creates a reaction, which sometimes it is rather negative. And it is intimidating. I understand that a man that has been brought up under the cultural standards of the country, I don't want to talk about chauvinism because that is a word which is too wide, but we need to consider the cultural background of the person. Sometimes when they see that women are more empowered, that creates intimidation and that may lead to some frictions. So we need to manage that in the classrooms. We need to see how to integrate women in all of the different fields, professional, educational, and social activities. And above all, we need to value that women were still struggling for that, for those positions, for those spaces, hierarchical spaces within an organization. And we're still fighting for, in order to be valued and to be paid equally as a man, not to be discriminated because of our condition of being a woman, because we're mothers, or because we have our menstruation, or because we have the menopause, or some other conditions which make women vulnerable. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
No sé si alguien más quisiera comentar.
I don't know if anyone else would like to make some comments. I know that we're talking about, we're speaking Spanish, but the ones who are speaking a different language, well, remember that we have interpretation available. So if you want to comment, I don't know, Michelle is also experiencing in that in the Caribbean countries.
Fernanda, tal vez mientras aquí otras colegas vienen.
Well, we wait for the colleagues. Let me tell you, this is a challenge we have noticed in our processes, probably related to the naturalization of certain harmful practices of gender violence. They are, would say, very present practices and present for so long that it makes us look at them as something natural. So there is a great importance of the work from going to from this naturalization to an opposed strategy, to an opposed thing of considering them unacceptable. That's where we can have a more critic view. This is what we have encountered as challenge, as an important challenge, expressed in the most direct practices of violence, physical, psychological, as well as the role distribution and allocation, because that's naturalized, that's present, and it appears as a challenge when it comes to promoting any type of initiative. What you're saying is very interesting. So my question is, what type of methodologies do you use to make these desnaturalization processes when it comes to some discrimination or violence practices or role allocation in the educational spaces? How do you work on that? We are precisely in the building of that strategies, in the design of that strategy, because the work so far has been focused on getting to know, identifying, and construct that along with the methodologies when it comes to the strategies. Because what we don't want is to imagine from outside the communities, we don't want to design any type of strategy. Then we are under that time of trying to build these strategies which could make sense. That's part of the methodology. However, I would like to add to what Joanna is saying, and since we are here, there's a very interesting thing, and we saw that at the beginning of the process, and it continues to be interesting because research teams were configured in the countries, our national members. And most of the members in one of those teams are men. So we have several men in the national teams, and that's very interesting. At the beginning, we were like amazed, and we wonder, okay, we'll see what happens here. And then we thought, very interesting. And it is interesting because it makes us face a challenge to develop in our own researches. Even more because among them there were different sensitivities to gender, sensitivity to this gender matter, because beyond their expertise as researchers and their excellent level as researchers, we needed them to incorporate the gender approach. And of course, research approach, participatory, well, action research, that was even simpler to implement. So in the training spaces with the national teams, we have worked on the in-person workshop in the accompaniment workshop. And there was one that was conducted with all of them, and some of them only with the teams. The identification of violence in their own daily activities, for example, and gender violences in their own daily activities. They work with their emotions, the identification of their emotions, those things that are supposed to be only female, and which help us, and they have helped us greatly, to the teams, to everyone, to develop a more sensitive perception, more acute perception on how, on where violences are, because sometimes they are invisibilized and it becomes difficult to see them since they are naturalized. Sometimes patriarchal models are difficult to visualize. And then we worked with connection methodologies with their own body or with our own bodies. And there's several things that are systematized in this methodological guide. And we thought that some educational units may adapt them because that might be useful, whereas others might not be that useful. And then we would have to rethink of other methodologies. And let me close by saying two things. How could I rephrase this? Well, a good place for referring with a sensitive look or approach to gender matters is the place of the respect for each other, not gender precisely, because what is behind gender subordination is the consideration of the other as someone inferior than you. It's not a responsibility for each individual man. It's a code of the coexistent model given between men and women, but also between adults and children, for example. So this thing makes men be out of this blaming side, which is something useful to work around gender with them. And in the case of women, I could say that we don't start from the idea that due to the women, they had deconstructed the gender matter, because we already know it's not like that. Women, we also reproduce gender patterns. and we have naturalized it. We believe that the secret behind this is the way you treat people, people that may change. We can change, all of us, and be better people and live better. So then you remove that blame that sometimes gender produces, and then you start referring to what's substantial. And what's substantial is that the other one is equal to you in their difference, and they deserve respect. You cannot subordinate that person, and you cannot use that person. Probably I was too long. I will be in silent. Thank you very much. Very nice comment, very relevant comment. Michelle is saying something there, just internet issues. And she was saying that denomination schools spread all over Latin America and the Caribbean, also a challenge to approach gender subjects. And what you were mentioning, gender is a word that produces resistance in some spaces. Maybe we should refer to empathy, equity, justice, other concepts that might be around gender and allowed to approach these subjects without feeling the strong resistance produced. In some spaces, we are talking about a territory we all know, which is pretty conservative in several scopes, in areas with a strong religious logic. Then I believe it is very interesting what you were telling us as an entry point. I don't know if somebody else would like to make a comment. As of 2016, we've been in the process of a non-sexist education training processes, particularly those conservative countries. Fernanda has just mentioned that. We all know about it. The biggest challenge we have had is that first, using the gender as a name. Sometimes we need to change that name. Now we are going through a process of reformulation so that men can also feel involved. Because if we say we're going to train gender-based, we got some difficulties, and we need to sometimes propose the thing about educating for purposes. And we have seen some resistance at the beginning in male teaching staff because they believe that gender matter is only for women. So we need to incorporate in our collective process, we need to incorporate men to work masculinely on the subject of masculinities and make them part of it. We may say that we have evidence that when they reach these training processes and we do not create resistance, we have allies, people next to us. So the biggest challenge is that from the very beginning, when we start formulating the training process, we should take into account that men must be involved as a fundamental part. We need to see what any other big challenge is time. Sabrina was telling us that. Sabrina was saying that she's very busy in this formation process. So we need to create formation process. If they are apart from these training processes, there might be those training processes which do not make the all their labor in the classroom. There might be practical strategies so that the coming day they reach the school or the classroom to be implemented. This is a big challenge, but a great effort and mission to train teaching staff, because when we change, when we do this, we change personal lives, and then we transform people in the classroom. Thank you very much. I continue sharing my screen. Well, if you see, we are including we are working on a mapping on everything that's been commented. So the idea is to make a publication based on this collective practice we are doing now. Everyone participating here is contributing on this gender matters. Let's go to the third question that is highly connected to what we were recently talking. And I believe that you already had shed some light on it. And how could these challenges be faced? Jenny has mentioned a few things as well as Nestle. Nelsie, in this idea of using a different word rather than danger, but probably going on the respect side, probably this idea that everyone are somehow, we are all somehow of a victims of a relation structure reproducing gender violence. And I don't know if you would like to address one more topic that you may see as a possible strategy to face these challenges we have already identified. These challenges of working in a equality gender perspective by putting the gender matters in order to build strategies and reach equality gender. I don't know if you see any point or any strategy to address this. Would anybody like to say anything? I just want to mention something regarding to Nestle comment. I feel that gender work is much deeper, as you were saying. It's not just for men and women. It has to do with respect. I was thinking of the adultcentrism, the respect we need to have for children. Just it's a matter of respecting the other person, treating them as a subject, not an object, because gender makes us think a lot in first instance, and in many countries this happens, that adults, we believe we have certain rights over children, and that is also reproduced in children, believe they have some rights over women. And finally, like deconstructing this thing about treating the people like object and not subject. And the important behind this is treating ourselves as equals, respecting differences, but I believe that's fundamental, respecting the others and understanding the other person as a subject and value that person under this. And this is why I believe this work is very important about gender, because it's much broader. It has to do with respect in general, as you were saying. That was my comment. Let me say something here. There's a challenge for us, like, guides, researchers, being in the places, because what we are saying to work around gender is also valid for us. So we need to approach communities from that place, respect for the other, acknowledgement for the other, whether they are diverse, whether they are big, short, old, young, it doesn't matter. Whether they are authority or not, it's not really important. That's irrelevant for the pedagogic processes. I'm being very honest, I'm being very honest. That's irrelevant for the pedagogic processes. Your position, your training, well, previous training is important because that's a knowledge you contribute, but it doesn't make you superior to the rest. And it's a challenge for researchers, for technicians, and for teams. It's like saying, okay, we'll do what we are saying we have to do. Not to be opposed to what you're saying, right?
Quisiera comentar. Perdón, o sea, más perdón mi enfoque porque tal vez es, aquí sí resalta mi formación.
Well, okay, I'm going to say something where my training highlights, and it has to do with the planning, probably on the more methodological side. What you are proposing is very important when it comes to content, for example. Then I would like to insist on that part of the involvement in these processes in the design stage, in the implementation of the challenges stage, to those decision makers around having their sensitivity, whether they are men or women. In some cases, sadly, we have had to strengthen women to make them be part of these gender processes, to change these initiatives, and based on it, the idea of having a good planning, and beyond the planning, the necessary allocation of the resources to implement all these challenges. Because we know it is not just through goodwill things are to be achieved, but also with the resources allocation to implement. So part of this thing about sensitivity for in decision makers, the convincement they will have about the importance of allocating resources for this type of processes. Then, from my logic, I would like to emphasize in that part. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your contribution. Of course, having the necessary resources is absolutely understood to have the implementation of these initiatives. It takes time. We know that. Well, we said that the fact that men probably do not necessarily feel concerned about these gender subjects, it is true that in their training, I believe we have to briefly and quickly explain, that is, to show how these men are concerned in all behaviors associated to different people. And all these need to be an important part for men at the beginning of their training. It is not towards women only. And men has a lot of behaviors that should be integrated, and they can lead to a negative behavior of toxic masculinity that needs to be identified from the very beginning in order to tell them that they will be able to learn things about themselves, men, of course. Therefore, we need to make men involved from the very beginning with this type of training. Thank you very much.
¿Hay alguien más que quisiera comentar?
Is there anyone else willing to comment? So I think we have mentioned interesting ideas over here in all of the processes. This idea of when an initiative is designed, which are the aspects to be considered in order to start. What Sabrina also mentioned has to do with that. How think how to implement something that creates so much of this cultural shock in some spaces, where you are going to work on how to structure, how relations are thought to be in a naturalized way, and therefore you need to break all of those thoughts. So Sabrina, it is important what she mentioned. We need to involve men and their masculinity. Sometimes it might be problematic. And what's the benefit of understanding that as well? We're also thinking about masculinity for an next session, because this toxic masculinity, it is not only a problem for women and for sexual diversity, but also for men, because that means men need to assume many different roles, which have a high demand, high negation on what they are as human beings in terms of emotional connections or bonds. Later, we saw everything related to which are the problems in the implementation. We have got plenty of ideas on how to work all of these elements in order to work from a perspective which is wide, which is also related to rights, especially in educational places. If there is no more comments, there's no more comments, right? If there's no more comments, I'd like to ask you, before we finish this session, please let's assess this session in a mini questionnaire so we can improve and we can also think in the methodology for our next sessions. Remember, this is thought for 5 sessions. This is session number 2. We want to bring experts in order to work and keep on and going deeper into the next topics. And we want to prepare a publication about what's been talked about in this space, in these 2 spaces that we have had already. So I'd like to ask you, you can see my screen, right? Anyways, I will share this in the chat box. This is a questionnaire, which is really brief. It will take you just 5 minutes to answer. It is in the 3 languages. So please, I will copy the link and please answer this right now. The first link is in Spanish. So the 3 links are there in the chat box as well. So please get into that link and we'll give you some 5 minutes to answer that and we will do the closure of the session. Thank you.